Hello, everyone. So, I'm Harry. Oh, wait, that's this slide. I'm Harry, and I'm here from Clear Honest Design. It's a small design agency that I'm really fortunate to run with a couple of my close mates. And we do everything design and development for charities or companies who want to make the world a little better. And we're, again, really lucky to only work with people who are awesome, doing amazing things. And so, as a very brief, I promise, self-indulgent bit, I'll just give a tiny bit of background as to how I got to this point, because it is relevant in the end, I promise. So, I started when I was at school. I spent more time designing the notes for lessons than I actually did listening to the lessons. And this carried on going through uni, where I studied politics, and they were pretty bad. I mean, they were really bad. And they eventually got slightly, marginally better. And they only kind of made sense to me, or so I thought. I kept getting more and more intense. This is when I discovered interesting fonts, and it was horrible to read, but I did it. And anyway, I then found out, actually, when I was putting this presentation together, that this slideshow, that when I was 16, I put on SlideShare, I think because you had to upload something to download someone else's, had been viewed 140,000 times. And it had loads of comments of people asking, please, can you do more of these, whatever it was. And it was awful. Looking at it now as doing this for a living, it was bad. But it was an amazing insight that in today's day and age, anyone could just put something online and it could be viewed 140,000 times. Whereas in the past, you'd have to have published a book, which you'd then have a deal with the schools, and it would be this whole process. But now some 16-year-old kid could just go and do it. And so at uni, I came up with this idea with a mate of mine to do a project called Let's Speak Clearly, where I was really frustrated through my politics degree that there were so many really important ideas and different concepts that could change the world, but they were only really accessible to people who had the time or money to spend 3 years doing a politics degree. And to me, that seemed crazy. And the whole university was setting me up to go and teach other students how to do stuff, not actually do anything with it. And so, actually, this is my tangent. My biggest frustration at the time was there was so much terminology that people tried to talk to everyone else about, and it was so exclusionary. And it meant that as soon as someone heard that term, they just shut off. And I see that all the time in my current job. And all of these terms can be great if you know that the other person you're speaking to understands them. It's a shortcut, whatever. But the number of meetings that I go to where people use these terms and I just look at eyes, and you can tell that a lot of people have absolutely no idea what they are. On here, 2 of these aren't even real. But you wouldn't know just quickly looking at it. I think it's burrito and, or maybe one of them's not real. Oh yeah, only one of those. Burrito's the fake one there. But all of these can be useful, but they can also be exclusionary for people to contribute to an idea. And when you do that, it means that you don't have as wide level of input from people. And often people don't want to say, I don't actually know what that means, because they think that they'll seem stupid or silly or ridiculed. And that's crazy. If you can explain something in a simpler concept, you should. There's no reason to use a deliberately exclusionary word. And as a designer, that's my job, essentially, for all of my clients and anyone I work with, and for myself. We're constantly asking, okay, would someone else understand this thing? If they don't, and they're one of the people who are meant to, then we failed, not the person who hasn't understood it. And generally speaking, for charities and businesses who are trying to communicate a really important idea, you see that all the time as well. And the first question is, whenever we start and go and have a meeting with someone, we say, can you describe what you do in a single sentence? And a lot of the time you have like 9 different things from around the room, and then at that moment everyone realizes that no one really knows what they do. So then we say, right, you're not really ready to speak to us yet. Why don't you work out what you do, and then we'll work out with you how best to communicate that to people. And when you're doing it, The important thing is to try and think from the perspective of someone who isn't in your world, because it's so easy to fall into the trap of just using terms and terminology that makes sense to you in your office, but for people who aren't in that space, it either doesn't make sense and they switch off, or they don't fully understand it, and so the weight of the point you're trying to make is lost. So that was my tangent. So let's speak clearly. I did really simple, again, pretty awful looking at it now, but ideas of, I think at the time, there were lots of talk in the papers about housing bubbles, and everyone just used the term housing bubble like everyone knew what that meant. And I didn't know what it meant, and I studied politics. I couldn't really say. And so this was what I decided I wanted to do. But I didn't do that. I went and worked for a corporate social responsibility company, consultancy, and pretty soon I realized that where I had the idea that I could make the biggest, baddest people slightly better, actually I was just making the biggest, baddest people slightly more able to hide the bad things they did. You know, so like Coke releasing Coca-Cola Life, and they made it green, so it's healthy now. You know, or Nestle having a bottle with 15% less plastic. It would be better if they just sold less plastic water bottles as a whole, but they kind of figured that 15% less is enough for people. And so I left that, and I decided that all of the design elements that I'd been doing for ages just on the side was actually a really effective and potential route to help the little guys over the big players, and to help the people who genuinely do care and do have important things to say to be better than the big players. And the reason you can do that in design, especially now, is that it's so accessible. If you have £1 million to spend on a website, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be better than the £1,000 website. It's all about the thinking behind it. And as long as you've got a really clear idea of what you're trying to say, who's using your site, and what they're trying to get out of it, there's no reason with technology today that you couldn't do it yourself. A lot of sites could just be a Squarespace site or a Wix site, which is crazy for me to say as a design and development agency, but you can. And a lot of the people who come to us come saying, hey, I need this 10 grand site because all our competitors have got it, or all the other charities have got it. And I say, but do you really? Because all you really need to do is tell people what you do and get them to donate. So why don't you spend £10 a month and do that and spend the money on something else that's more useful, more aligned to what you're doing? But, so this talk is mostly focused on people who can't necessarily go and immediately hire a big agency to do something, or a small agency to do something. But the same principles apply whether you're trying to do it yourself, update an existing site, or hire someone. So the main thing is question everything. And this is really the main value that designers bring to a table. It's design thinking, not necessarily being able to make something look pretty or to code a website. It's asking the right questions. So that first question, sum up what you do in a sentence, is a really important one. Other questions like, who's actually using your site? Who's using your thing? Who are the people who are coming to your charity website? Why are they coming there? And being really honest with yourself and your users, and not treating them as you'd like them to be, but actually as they are. So part of that is, as I said, trying to think outside of your bubble. It's really tempting if you're working in this amazing space where you're saving lives every day, to think that everyone will instinctively want to come and support you and thinks like you do. But it's not the case necessarily, because you've got loads of different charities and companies and cat videos that you're competing with. And so many clients and charities and people we work with say, right, well, if we put this amazing image and text on, this will work. Everyone will come, they'll give us all the money, everything's solved. And then you have to say, but bear in mind, they're sat in front of the TV, flicking through, And there's way funnier stuff than your really hard-hitting thing that you're trying to convince them of. So you've got to do something a little different. You've got to try and separate yourself from all of the other content that people are seeing. One of the ways you can do that is just being honest, especially in today's day and age, like with the Nestlés, the Cokes, the Facebooks, whoever. The difference is that people who are genuinely doing good, that can come through, and you can be honest about what you're trying to do, because those other big baddie people can't. Because if they're honest, everyone would hate them. But the charities and the people doing good can be. So a really good example of that is The Guardian. I don't know if anyone has seen it, but at the bottom of articles now, they say, hey, we really need some money from you guys because this is expensive, and if you appreciate what we do, we'd really like your support. And it was really out there and brave at the time to not really offer anything in return. They weren't offering tote bags and, you know, like crosswords and things like that. It was just, hey, we need some money for this. And it was really effective. They now make more money from voluntary donations than they do from advertising, which is crazy. They were expected to make a loss for like another 10 years or something like that. And they're so far ahead of the curve now from where they thought they'd be, that it's just incredible. And so with a lot of the work we're doing, we've seen really positive steps as well and outcomes from saying, why don't you just be honest and say that this thing costs a lot of money and we need your help and we're doing it in this particular way. Would you like to support us? And people seem to really like that. The next thing is being empathetic, both internally about how the other people who are meant to update the things or create the content or what's possible, not having crazy sky-high expectations that don't get fulfilled. But more importantly, for users, thinking about the mental state they're in and what you want them to do. A lot of a good example recently is a charity that was focused around people experiencing a crisis in mental health. And initially, the suggestion, what they wanted, is they wanted people to sign up to a mailing list and donate and click through 4 different articles to read and then look on the gallery. And when they looked at the analytics, they were saying, well, this is awful. People are coming to the page, reading this thing and then leaving. And actually, maybe that's what you want them to do. If someone's going to a site in a crisis and you've got an article that's meant to help them in that moment, it's probably not a bad thing if they read the thing and then maybe they go and act on the advice in the article and they're happier and healthier because of it. There's too much of a focus, especially in web development and analytics, on arbitrary measures of success, which don't necessarily align to what the charity or organization actually wants to achieve. It's not just about how many pages have they viewed. And that empathy in how you design a page allows you to more accurately target the needs of the people who are there on the site in the first place. Because you're understanding that people who come there they have their own stuff going on. They're not just empty vessels that you can fill with as much content as possible. They're trying to get something. So in terms of best things you can do to work out and get examples is to look at other people. What are other sites, charities, companies doing? And a really useful exercise is to choose 5 or 6 of the people who you think are doing stuff really well, ideally in a similar sort of space, but it doesn't have to be, and then go through it with a fine-tooth comb and ask yourself, why are they doing it like this? Have they done their research? Have they not? And in those discussions, you'll actually start to unpick a lot of the really important premises that you have and you can then apply to your site. That's what all good designers do. You know, they look at the best case examples, try and think, oh, why have they done that? That's interesting. Look into it. Maybe you'll find it's a terrible solution, but then at least you know to avoid that and you can start to understand a lot of the logic behind it. Then once you've got your kind of idea of what could work, test it, and then keep testing it, and don't be too proud or afraid to change it and say, I was wrong. I tried something, it didn't work, so I'll try it again. In terms of an amazing website that everyone should check out, A, because it's hilarious, and B, because it's really, really, really useful when you're thinking about web design, is a site called theuserisdrunk.com. And it's this amazing UX, user experience designer, who gets companies to pay him to get blind drunk and then film himself trying to use their site. And it is amazing to watch. And the basic principle is, if your site isn't simple enough that someone who can barely stand can use it, then you can do better. And when you watch these videos, you actually see how a lot of people will use sites. You know, scrolling down, and then I think on one example, there was a picture of a rabbit. And he went, oh, that's so cool, I love rabbits. Hold on, I'm going to search for rabbits. And he searches for rabbits, and he goes down this hole, and then he's like, why am I looking at rabbits? I'm going to go back to the site. And then he sees the rabbit again. He's like, I love rabbits. I'm going to look for more rabbits. And those little things, you know, like, okay, most people wouldn't do that. But that kind of logic, a load of people, for example, one really good example of this is people have Instagram or Twitter feeds just displaying their tweets on their site. Sometimes that's a good idea. A lot of the time it's not, because the main thing you want from Twitter or Instagram is for people to interact with it and for people to like it or share it. And you can't really do that if it's just in a little box on the site. You want them to actually be on Twitter. That's where they can share it and they can retweet it, and then it gets to more people. But on the other hand, if you just have a link to say, go to my Twitter, and that's early on, then they might just go to your Twitter and they don't read all the stuff on your site. And so at that point, they see someone else has retweeted that thing on your Twitter, they click on that, and all of a sudden they're looking at funny cat videos. So there's just balances that you need to think about as to who's using your site in a really practical, kind of granular manner. So while you're looking at your sites, there's some really simple basics that are worth noticing. So this is one we see all the time. Don't centrally align text if there's a lot of it. It's really hard to read and people's eyes hurt and they will just stop reading. Also on text, less is always more. If you've got a whole load of text, put it on a page so that the people who want to find it can, but the people who are just there in the first place don't get 3 paragraphs in and then go to cat videos. That's basically avoid people going to cat videos is the takeaway from this talk. There's this a useful idea, I don't know if anyone's heard of it, where it's called a pyramid of engagement, which is really useful for websites, which is that at every layer of a pyramid, you have less and less people, and at every layer going up, they have more and more expertise and a more niche interest for what they're looking for. If you target your website at your most expert, niche, persistent user, you'll exclude all of the people below them because they don't need that information. And actually the people who are higher up on that pyramid will search out the stuff on your site, maybe because they don't need to see all the general stuff. They know that already, they're an expert. Or maybe because they're trying to catch you out. With a lot of charities or ethical businesses, your most persistent user is the most ethical user. And the first thing that they'll do is try and check whether you're greenwashing. Are you doing Coca-Cola green? Right? And so you don't need to target everything to everyone as soon as you get there. The key is actually to make it so that it applies to as many people as possible. So we designed a few years ago an ethical fashion directory to help people find ethical companies and designers and clothes shops and things. And one of the things that we had to think about and the decision we came to is that Actually, the site should just be great for anyone, whether you care about the planet or labour in Bangladesh or anywhere, or any of those things or not. Because if you can get as many people buying ethical fashion, that's better than only preaching to the converted. And actually, if we started immediately with, hey, this is the most ethical thing ever, you should be ashamed of yourselves for buying other stuff, then loads of people will be turned off from it. Because they go, oh, I don't want that, I just wanted a pair of jeans. But then, importantly, having it really well signposted of where people can find out that actually that more ethical kind of statement and everything about it is really crucial. Because likewise, if they can't find their way to it, they won't see it and they'll think that you're scamming. And so it's just that balance between the two. The next one is just showing how that looks better than that. It's easier to read. And left and also more line height. I know it's really specific and nerdy, but if you have more line height between your sentences, it's way easier to read. So this is another example. Loads of sites. This is probably the single biggest trend that I've noticed in people who come to us or sites that we see is on the homepage, there's a tendency to just try and put everything that you do and everything you want people to click right at the top. And you've got all sorts of different bits that are screaming for your attention. There's other things wrong with this. Stock photography is awful, don't use it. There are really good resources now. The best one probably is a site called unsplash.com. It's all completely free, royalty-free imagery, and it doesn't look, it's not just a load of really white people in a room clearly not really enjoying themselves but dying inside. It's good photography that really does make a difference. Similarly, for buttons, don't ever put click here in a button. It's terrible. You have no idea what the button is going to do, and so it's kind of scary to do it, to click that. You could be taken anywhere. Also, for anyone with sight impairment who use screen readers, this is not useful. Just saying, oh, click here. It doesn't help. So you should say things like donate now, go to about, whatever it might be as descriptive as you possibly can be with your links. It'll make a big difference. In the header, you don't need every single page or thing that you've got immediately in your top navigation bar. People, a bit like with the pyramid idea, if people want to know your partners, say, or who you get funded by, or your board, they'll do that by looking in About Us. And then within About Us, you can then give them a sub-menu or other links to go directly to it. But no one who's looking for your board will not think about clicking on About Us first. So you don't need to try and overload it. The paradox of choice is really, really real in websites. The more things you ask people to be able to click, the less they will for any of them. Final one on this, no text on top of images where you can't really read the text. People do that all the time. Either don't have text over the image or be really fussy about what image you put behind there. The number of sites, oh, and another one, carousels are awful. Unless you're showing pictures, which are just nice, carousels are great. If you've got a carousel on the top of your website with really important information, the chances are no one's going to see the third one. And I think basically the stats on it is I think only 5% of people ever click a carousel to go through, and only 1% of people click anything other than the first one. So it's just not a good way to have important information. If it's stuff that you want everyone to see, then don't make something where they won't see it for at least a portion of the time, or if they happen to be unlucky and they've opened a website and then they've looked away to chat to a mate for 5 seconds, come back and the most important thing on your site is gone. It's just not great. So, generally speaking, And obviously every site is different. The first thing you want to do when someone comes to your site is say what you do. The number of people who assume that everyone knows them immediately, and they don't. Most traffic to most websites, especially in charity kind of world, are new visitors, people who haven't necessarily been there before. And the assumption should be that they've just heard your name somewhere, or a mate has interacted and been like, oh, you should check these people out. They're really good. But they won't then necessarily know what you do. And the sentence that you have allows you to narrow and define the mindset that they're in when they're viewing the rest of your site. So that first sentence is really, really key, so that everywhere else on the site where you say, hey, will you do this thing, part of the being honest, they already know what you do and why they should support you in that way. So, and immediately, if there's one really key thing, just have a button straight away that says what you should do. Oh, my donate button's broken. That's an example of what you shouldn't do. Notice for broken buttons. But similarly, if you've got one really key, this kind of thing is called a call to action button. It's sometimes called a CTA. If your whole brand is blue, have your main button in an opposite color. A good way to think about that is on the color spectrum, whatever's opposite will stand out the most from the rest of your brand. There's a really good site you can use called Adobe Color, where you can put in a base color and it will then tell you other colors that work with that color based on where they are in the color wheel and what's the most contrasting color. And so if you have everything the same color, nothing stands out. Similarly, if you've got loads of different colors, nothing stands out. Ideally, you want to have, say in this example, anywhere where you talk about donation be in that one color, because then it reinforces that color. It stands out because it's used sparingly. If you can hire someone, an agency, if you've got the means to, then I would say the most important thing in choosing the right agency is choosing someone who shares your beliefs and values and goals. Because that will mean that at every step of the way, when they're going and doing their research and strategy and coming up with designs, you know that they're hopefully embodying that same level of empathy that as a charity or business, you're trying to embody as well. And it's not super easy, not everyone can, but most good design agencies will do a good job at the end result in terms of how it looks or operates. You know, they'll all pass a bar of being a certain level of good. That's not the biggest concern or worry most of the time. It's making sure that the design agency has built a site or a product or whatever it is that is really in line with both the users of the thing and how they're thinking, and tying it into the aims and goals of you as a company or charity. And that applies both to the front end of the site that users see when they go on, but also the back end of the site. Lots and lots of agencies build sites which look amazing, but are a nightmare for the staff. And it means that it takes up loads more of their time to update the thing, which means they have less time to actually do the important work, which they're using the website to promote. So one of the questions to any agency should be, can you build this in a way that means I have to spend as little time as possible updating and doing anything with this site? Because it frees up time for everyone else. So we get all manners of briefs. Some of them are amazing, some of them are awful, but there's a few key tenets that if everyone did this, it would make life so much easier and the whole process quicker and more effective. So first off, that sentence, what do you do? I'd say probably 20 or 30% of our clients, we spend the first meeting just trying to work out what they do and just going around the room and asking, does anyone have an idea of what you do. And then through that discussion, it crystallizes what you do, and it then focuses all of the rest of the conversation in the brief. So often you see briefs that are scattered all over the place and don't have one consistent goal of what it's trying to achieve. And you can tell. And it means you have a site that isn't tailored to what the charity is trying to achieve. Then, what's not working on the site? Where can you do better? Why are you wanting to have a digital tool or employ a design agency in the first place? That is another really key question. If the answer is, well, we've just got some funds, then it could be that the answer that comes back is, you don't need to do anything. Your site's fine. No one's on your site, and then maybe that's a different problem. Maybe the issue is that your site's fine, but no one can find it. So the solution isn't to build a new site with the hope that everyone will now magically find you. Maybe what you should do is actually pay for some ads, or go to more events, or do something in the real world that gets people interested in the first place. Similarly, what do you do really, really well? What are the things that people love? A lot of the time when you do a redesign, you can actually lose the thing that people really appreciated about the charity or business in the first place. And your most committed, loyal following, you don't want to piss off, really. They're the people, your ambassadors, who are going to go and tell everyone else. If you can, involve them. Speak to people who use your services already and ask them what they're having trouble with or what they really like, because they're a really important voice in the conversation around how you can improve. And then the final one of what's your budget is really key, not because most good agencies, if you work with them, shouldn't be trying to squeeze every last penny out of you, but there's a whole range of what you can do for any budget. If someone came to us and said, look, we've got 50 grand, what can you do for us? We could think of loads of stuff, and maybe we could only think of 30 grand's worth of stuff that's really, really impactful, that we think could be effective and make a difference. Or maybe we could think of 60 grand, but it at least helps to refine the kind of scale we're thinking. For any site, and we say this to people all the time, for any budget, you can make the most effective thing possible within the confines of that budget. You could make a 5 grand site really effective, but you have to know what you're working with so that you know what the priorities are. There's no point thinking about a feature that will take a month to build and cost 20 grand if the charity's only got 2 grand. It's much more helpful to know that you're working with 2 grand in the first place and say, okay, cool. If we've only got 2 grand, what's the most awesome, effective thing we can possibly build for that amount of money? And hopefully, again, based on honesty, both sides, if they're being honest, can have a kind of frank discussion. And maybe the agency will say, look, I really think if it was possible, if you could get 8 grand, you could do this really cool thing. But if you've only got 2, let's start here, and why don't we think about ways together we could make more money? Why don't we add a donation thing and be honest and say, we want to do this really cool feature that's going to help loads of people. Would people like to see that? And then you also involve community. And then the other thing that's really key is content. You can have as much beautiful window dressing as you want, and you can have a site or product or offering that looks incredible. Any designer really can make anything look good, but if the main content and guts of it aren't enticing or engaging, there's nothing that will do. A lot of people come and want a snazzy new site, but they only post anything on it once every 3 months. And then they go, well, we did this redesign. Why are people not coming every day? And they won't, because there's nothing new, or the content that's on there isn't well written enough, or isn't interesting or engaging. So as a first step, content will always beat design. Unless your site's really broken, you can start testing the assumptions of getting more people there by focusing on producing really good content that people want. because it also means that when you then go to do a redesign, you have a better idea of what people are interested in. You can say, oh, since we started doing this type of content, everyone loves it, everyone's reading it. And so then the designer might say, oh, great, why don't we think about putting that on the homepage? Or could that be more front and center? Or maybe this is a whole separate, really cool tool in and of itself, because everyone loves it. And so it's really just for any site or any product, trying to think and be as honest and empathetic and open to new ideas as possible, and just test every assumption and use language where everyone can take part, because it means that you'll hopefully stumble upon a way to really cut through and stop people going to cat videos. Thank you all.